Tim Burton's Batman, 1989, wasn't just a movie, it was a cultural revolution. With its dark atmosphere, unforgettable performances, and a reimagined Caped Crusader, it redefined what a superhero film could be. But while Gotham's skyline lit up with cinematic brilliance, real-life tragedy followed some of the talented actors who helped make the film a masterpiece. In this moving tribute, we look back at the iconic stars of Batman, 1989, who have since passed away, remembering their contributions to the screen, the legacies they left behind, and the silent goodbyes that remind us even legends wear mortal masks. Michael Gough was born on November 23, 1916, in Kuala Lumpur, then part of British Malaya, into a privileged colonial family. But his early life was marked not by luxury, but by emotional absence. His father, a rubber planter, was distant and stern, and Michael's childhood was spent mostly in the care of nannies and in English boarding schools, where silence was survival. He learned early how to vanish behind a polite smile, a trait he would later embody perfectly in his most famous role as Alfred Pennyworth, Batman's loyal butler. Acting was not a calling but an escape. After returning to England and training at the Old Vic, he slowly carved a name for himself in British theatre and Hammer horror films. His career was long but not without droughts, decades of thankless roles, financial struggles, and moments of bitter envy toward peers who soared while he treaded water. The role of Alfred in Tim Burton's Batman, 1989, brought him international recognition at 72, but it arrived too late to heal the wounds of being overlooked for so long. He played the butler with quiet dignity, masking a well of sorrow, the same way he lived. In real life, Michael's genteel demeanor hid a soul worn by loss. He married 4 times, each ending in estrangement or silence. His third wife, Annika Wills, left him, describing him as emotionally unreachable, a man lost in his own head. They had a daughter together, but Gough was rarely present. He spoke little about his family, as if doing so might unravel him. There was a private sadness to him, one that deepened with age. Despite his refined voice and poised bearing, Michael was haunted by feelings of inadequacy. Friends described him as kind, yet remote, always halfway in another world. He never embraced fame. Instead, he endured it, treating applause like a passing storm, unpredictable and undeserved. Michael Gough died quietly at home on March 17, 2011, at the age of 94. By then, he was a revered character actor with an estimated net worth of $5 million. Modest by Hollywood standards, but significant for a man who had once considered giving up acting altogether. Yet for all his success, he remained something of a mystery. A man who spent a lifetime playing other people while never quite revealing himself. Pat Hingle was born on July 19, 1924, in Miami, Florida, during an era when America itself was staggering under the weight of the Great Depression. His father, a building contractor, struggled to keep food on the table. By the time Pat was 10, the family had moved more times than he could count, each home smaller than the last, each Christmas quieter. Early on, Pat learned how to be the dependable one, the silent anchor. It would become a defining trait, on screen and off. He served in the Navy during World War II, surviving a kamikaze attack that killed dozens around him. It changed him. The war didn't leave visible scars, but it hollowed something inside. A quiet ache he carried back to civilian life and buried in his work. Acting wasn't a dream for Pat. It was therapy, a way to wear someone else's skin and forget his own history for a while. By the time he was cast as Commissioner Gordon in Batman, 1989, he had already weathered a brutal fall, literally. In 1960, he was set to play the lead in Elmer Gantry, a role that could have launched him to stardom. But a freak accident, he fell down an elevator shaft, left him with a fractured skull, broken wrist, ribs, and nearly cost him his life. Burt Lancaster took the role, won an Oscar, and Pat was left to recover alone in a hospital bed, wondering if the spotlight had passed him by for good. His version of Gordon was steady, paternal, and understated, much like Pat himself. Yet behind the uniform was a man constantly second-guessing his worth. He often said he was a supporting man, never the star, but deep down he wanted more. The industry, however, had other plans. He was typecast, quietly respected but never celebrated. Pat's personal life mirrored that quiet sorrow. His first marriage to Alice Faye Dorsey ended in divorce after 26 years, worn thin by long absences and unspoken regrets. His second marriage to Julie Wright lasted, but his children often described him as emotionally distant, a man who showed up to everything, yet never truly opened up. He wasn't cold, just closed. On January 3, 2009, Pat Hingle died from myelodysplastic syndrome in Carolina Beach, North Carolina. He was 84. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at $10 million, earned from a lifetime of roles that often went unnoticed, even as he gave every one of them a part of himself. For Pat, the tragedy wasn't in being forgotten by fame, but in never quite believing he deserved it in the first place. Jack Palance was born Volodymyr Polonich on February 18, 1919, in Latimer Mines, Pennsylvania, the son of Ukrainian immigrants who toiled in the coal mines for pennies and came home coughing up black dust. Jack grew up in a house without warmth, physically or emotionally. Poverty was a constant companion, but so was pride. His father's hands, cracked and bloodied from labor, were a daily reminder that life offered no softness. He started boxing to survive, to release anger he couldn't speak aloud. With fists instead of words, Jack found strength. But war came, as it did for so many young men of his generation. As a bomber pilot in World War II, he nearly died in a crash, suffering severe burns that reshaped his face and ended his boxing dreams. The disfigurement haunted him, fueling the brooding presence he would later bring to the screen. His new face wasn't one for heroes, it was a face made for villains. Acting became his rebirth. He played killers, tyrants, and haunted men with a terrifying grace. But the more he became Jack Palance, the further he drifted from Volodymyr. In Batman, 1989, as mob boss Carl Grissom, he radiated menace with a whisper, embodying the fear he had wrestled with for decades. Audiences saw a villain. He saw a mirror. Success didn't bring peace. Jack was notoriously difficult on set, demanding, cold, often combative. Behind his intensity was deep isolation. Fame made him visible but not understood. He drifted from the Hollywood crowd, choosing to live on a ranch, alone with the horses, far from the artificial warmth of applause. His marriage to Virginia Baker lasted nearly 40 years but unraveled quietly. He had 3 children, but his presence in their lives was irregular, his affection conditional. He once admitted he didn't know how to be a father. His own had only taught him to endure, not to feel. Despite winning an Oscar late in life, Jack treated accolades with suspicion. "The only thing I ever wanted," he once said, "was to be left alone." He spent his final years writing poetry and painting, fragments of a soul long overlooked. On November 10, 2006, Jack Palance died of natural causes at the age of 87. His estimated net worth was $10 million. But no figure could measure the cost of a life spent wrestling with shadows. In the end, Jack was not the villains he played, but the boy from the mines, scarred, stoic, and still trying to breathe through the dust. Frank Gorshin was born on April 5, 1933, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, the son of Slovenian immigrants who spoke little English and worked brutally long hours just to survive. His father was a railroad worker, his mother a seamstress, and their home was filled more with silence and fatigue than laughter. But young Frank discovered early that if he made people laugh, or better yet, if he imitated them, they looked at him differently. He wasn't poor. He wasn't foreign. He was fascinating. Impressions became his refuge, then his craft. He could vanish into others, masking the boy who never quite felt American enough, loved enough, or safe enough. His mind was fast, but it was restless, buzzing with voices, mannerisms, ideas that danced just out of reach. His big break came in comedy clubs and television variety shows, but it was Batman, 1989, that brought him a brief resurrection, appearing as a version of Mendelstrom in a minor role years after his glory as the Riddler in the 1960s series. By then, the bright green suit was long gone, but the manic energy, the desperate need to be seen, remained. Frank's career was always in motion, but often on the margins. He never got the lead roles. His talent was undeniable, but it was slippery. People admired him, even feared his intensity, but rarely embraced him. He lived for applause, but the silence afterward was unbearable. He smoked obsessively, 5 packs a day, and often performed while gasping for breath. The addiction wasn't just to nicotine, but to performance itself. When he wasn't on stage, he didn't know who to be. His marriage to Cristina Randazzo lasted decades, but it was strained by infidelity and absence. He had a son, but fatherhood never came naturally. Frank's real marriage was to the spotlight. And when it dimmed, so did he. He kept performing into his 70s, even when his body began to fail him. In his final role as George Burns in a one-man show, he gave everything: pain, laughter, memory. But off stage, his voice grew hoarse, his breath shorter. Still, he refused to stop. On May 17, 2005, Frank Gorshin died of lung cancer and emphysema in Burbank, California. He was 72. His net worth at the time was estimated at $500,000, a modest sum for a man who had once lit up television screens across America. But Frank didn't chase wealth. He chased a laugh, a look, a moment when he could feel real through someone else's eyes. And in that fleeting reflection, perhaps he felt, briefly, like he mattered. Vincent Schiavelli was born on November 11, 1948, in Brooklyn, New York, into a Sicilian-American family where tradition ran deep and feelings ran silent. He was tall, painfully thin, with deep-set eyes and a face that seemed carved out of sadness. From childhood, he felt like an outsider, not just in school, where his looks drew ridicule, but even at home, where his sensitivity was seen as weakness. He retreated into fantasy, mimicking voices in his room, trying to become someone, anyone, who didn't feel so alone. He studied acting at NYU, and though his features often typecast him as the oddball, he leaned into it. He made a name for himself playing quirky, misunderstood characters: the lonely teacher in Fast Times at Ridgemont High, the ghost on the subway in Ghost, and later, a member of the Penguins' grotesque circus gang in Batman Returns, 1992. Even in bit parts, Vincent made you look. There was always a sadness behind the eyes. A man trying to be part of a world that never fully accepted him. Schiavelli didn't crave stardom, he craved connection. But the industry rewarded him for playing men on the margins, outcasts, freaks, souls just slightly out of step. Typecasting became a prison. He joked about it often, but privately, it ate at him. He longed to play someone ordinary, someone loved. He married actress Alice Beasley in 1985, and for a while, they found peace in each other. But his inner restlessness and career frustrations wore thin the bonds between them. They divorced in 1988, and though they shared a son, Vincent's nomadic lifestyle and unpredictable moods often kept him distant. He returned often to Sicily, as if trying to trace his roots backward to find something solid. In the last years of his life, he was more often abroad than in Hollywood, cooking, writing, and quietly slipping away from the industry that never quite knew what to do with him. His health deteriorated, but he didn't complain. Like so many of his characters, he simply faded from view. Vincent Schiavelli died on December 26, 2005, in Sicily, from lung cancer. He was 57. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at $500,000. He had once said he felt like he was just passing through this world. And in the end, that's how he left it, like a whisper or a ghost on a subway, here and gone before anyone could truly know who he was. Lloyd Bachner was born on July 29, 1924, in Toronto, Ontario, into a conservative Jewish household where expectations were high, but affection was rare. His father, a stern businessman, demanded success and stoicism. From an early age, Lloyd learned to perform, first to gain approval, then to survive emotionally. He wasn't the loudest in the room, but he was always watching, always shaping himself into what others needed. He began acting on radio in his teens, and after serving in World War II, he returned to Canada and built a career in television dramas. His voice, refined, commanding, became his signature. Hollywood noticed but never quite embraced him. He was handsome and articulate, yet somehow always cast just outside the spotlight. Never the lead, always the diplomat, the doctor, the detached authority figure. In Batman, 1989, he appeared briefly and uncredited as Alfred's doctor, an invisible role for a man who had long practiced disappearing into elegance. Beneath that polished exterior was a deep-seated ache. Lloyd often played men of power, but in life, he wrestled with insecurity. The industry praised his professionalism, but rarely his passion. He never made waves, he couldn't afford to. He knew that in Hollywood, character actors were interchangeable, and he worked relentlessly to stay employable, even as recognition eluded him. His marriage to Ruth Roher lasted more than 5 decades, a rarity in Hollywood, but it wasn't without hardship. Lloyd's career consumed him. He was distant, though not unkind, a man more comfortable reciting scripts than sharing his fears. They had 3 children, including actor Hart Bochner, but even fatherhood couldn't crack his emotional armor completely. He was present, yet perpetually withheld. In his final years, Lloyd's health declined. He battled cancer quietly, refusing pity. He continued working until the very end, as if terrified that stopping might erase him entirely. Fame had always been a fog around him, close enough to feel, but never to grasp. Lloyd Bochner died on October 29, 2005, in Santa Monica, California, from cancer. He was 81. His net worth at the time was estimated at $3 million, accumulated through decades of steady, understated work. But for all his calm dignity, Lloyd carried a private sorrow, that he had given so much to the screen, and yet remained a man known more by his roles than by his name. William Hootkins was born on July 5, 1948, in Dallas, Texas, a bright child in a place that often punished difference. From an early age, he felt out of place, both physically and emotionally. Overweight, introspective, and drawn to books and performance, he endured endless teasing at school. He learned to make people laugh before they could mock him, using humor as a fragile shield. But the loneliness never truly left. He studied at Princeton, then trained at Lambda in London, where he fell in love with the stage and the escape it offered. His bulky frame and expressive voice made him perfect for oddball or bureaucratic characters. Hollywood didn't quite know what to do with him, but it used him when it needed someone unforgettable in the margins. He was cast as Porkins in Star Wars, 1977, and later as Lieutenant Eckhart in Batman, 1989, a corrupt, heavy-set cop with a sneer that echoed self-loathing. The role hit close. William knew what it meant to be the one others dismissed, both in fiction and in life. Despite working with giants, Kubrick, Lucas, Burton, Hootkins was rarely recognized by name. He carried the burden of being memorable but not celebrated. His weight became both his trademark and his prison. Directors saw it. Audiences remembered it. But few ever saw him. Behind the grin and big roles was a man struggling with depression, anxiety, and a lifelong battle with his body. He wanted to be more than comic relief or the expendable side character, but Hollywood kept him boxed in. He married voice coach Carolyn Robb late in life, but their union was cut short by illness. Just as he was beginning to speak openly about his pain, about the isolation, the industry, the self-hate, his health began to fail. He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and the decline was rapid. On October 23, 2005, William Hootkins died in Santa Monica, California, at the age of 57. His net worth at the time was estimated at $1 million, a modest reflection of a career spent serving others' stories more than his own. In life, he was a background figure in blockbusters. In death, he left behind the quiet tragedy of a man who spent decades trying to be seen, while the world only ever saw his outline. Steve Pleiades was born on January 9, 1913, in Constantinople, then part of the fading Ottoman Empire. Of Greek descent, his early years were marked by upheaval and exile. His family fled the collapsing empire, eventually settling in Britain, a land that offered safety but never quite offered belonging. From the start, Steve lived as a man in between, between nations, between languages, between homes. He turned to acting not out of ambition, but out of necessity. It gave him structure, identity, and for brief moments, applause. With his distinguished accent and aristocratic features, he was quickly typecast as foreign dignitaries, doctors, and hotel managers, refined, forgettable, and always the other. In Batman, 1989, he played a nameless doctor, a blink-and-miss role that typified his career. To most, he was a background figure. To himself, he was a man silently bearing the weight of invisibility. Steve's talent was real, but the industry rarely looked beyond his accent. In Britain, he worked steadily, but never prominently. Stage work gave him dignity, film gave him bread. The price, however, was anonymity. He was used to it. He never complained, at least not aloud. But in quiet corners of the green room, he sometimes confided how tiring it was to always be cast as someone who didn't belong. Because deep down, that's what he always feared he was. Little is known of his personal life. He kept it shielded from the spotlight, almost as if protecting it from being dismissed like so many of his roles. He never married publicly, and no children were ever reported. In the end, there was just the work, and even that offered only partial refuge. Steve Plytas died on December 27, 1994, in Surrey, England, at the age of 81. His estimated net worth at the time was under $500,000, a lifetime of labor with little legacy. No headlines marked his passing, no retrospectives honored his craft. Yet in his countless minor roles, he served the stories of others with quiet grace. His tragedy was simple. He gave everything to a world that barely noticed he was there. Lee Wallace was born on July 15, 1930, in Brooklyn, New York, a borough teeming with grit, noise, and ambition. His parents were working class and weary, hardened by the Depression and burdened by the need to survive. Lee was a quiet boy with a gentle soul, more drawn to books and the stage than the streets outside. From a young age, he felt like life was happening around him, not to him, a feeling that would haunt him throughout his career. He entered acting in the 1950s, carving out a modest presence in New York theater and television. He had the look of a bureaucrat, a worn civil servant, the kind of man who got pushed around in city halls or forgotten in line. His most visible film moment came as Gotham's mayor in Batman, 1989, a brief role that captured the very essence of his type, powerful in title but powerless in truth. It was a perfect metaphor for his own life, always present, rarely heard. Wallace was never a star. He wasn't even close. He was a man directors called when they needed someone to look authentic, but never too interesting. And he accepted that. Not because he lacked ambition, but because he knew the industry didn't value men like him. There was bitterness in that acceptance, though he rarely showed it. He wore humility like armor. He married Marilyn Criss, an actress with a more visible career. They loved each other quietly and endured the long silences of show business together. They had a son, but Wallace was often away, bouncing between stage roles and television guest spots, rarely turning anything down. He worked not for fame, but for relevance. And yet, deep down, he feared that even his best work would fade without echo. In his final years, Wallace withdrew from the industry. He didn't make a fuss or chase legacy. He simply stopped showing up, just as quietly as he had arrived. Lee Wallace died on December 20, 2020, in New York City, at the age of 90. His estimated net worth was around $1 million. There were no tributes, no posthumous honors, no glossy obituaries in major outlets. But for those who watched closely, who caught the flicker of truth in his fleeting roles, Lee Wallace was something rare, a man who made the background feel real. His tragedy was quiet, his life ordinary, but in that ordinariness, he told stories no leading man ever could. Which character from Batman, 1989, holds a special place in your heart? How does it make you feel knowing that some of the beloved cast members are no longer with us? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Feel free to share them in the comments below. If you've been enjoying this content, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for watching.